Hello, everyone. My name is Ezra, otherwise known as E-Soup, and today we will be reading chapters 134 to 138. There is a link to trigger warnings in the description if you need that. Please go ahead and give the stream a like. And with that out of the way, how are y'all doing today? Hi, Nina. I have a lot to read today, and I don't want to go overtime, so I might not make as many comments today. I mean, I'm not going to read too fast, but I'm just going to kind of get through it. Because I have to, after the stream, I have to pick my girlfriend up from work, and I looked at the page count, and I was like, oh, today is like, I think the longest page count of the streams. But if anything weird happens, I might cut off a chapter early and redistribute chapters later, but I think I probably won't have to do that. So we'll just see how it goes. Hi, Henry. Oh yeah, Nina, it's not just you now. So last time was very eventful, and we just ended on a very epic moment of Xiao Qie cutting off that one guy's head. Hu Halu. He cut off his head. And we're just resuming right in the middle of the action. So we are on page 249 for chapter 134, which is called Mengzheng. Hu Helu was known among the Changjiu tribe as the person most likely to become an Esuhiri, a true hero. Although he was a cruel and brutal man, he was skilled in combat, and his company comprised the very best from the various Biansha tribes. These cavalrymen had only fear and no reverence for Hu Helu, yet it was precisely because of this fear that the shock of his death hit them like a boulder to the chest. In the blink of an eye, Hu Helu had been cut down, and crashing down with him came the morale of the Biansha horsemen. In his hasty conclusion that there were countless Li Bei reinforcements on their way, Hu Helu had snuffed out the determination of his men, now without a commanding general, to fight on. With Xiao Qie as the epicenter, they scattered in all directions. The long ribbon of torches snaked toward them from behind, as if a procession of 1,000,000 valiant soldiers approached through the grasses. Within 3rd Sand Camp, Gu Jin had also launched a surprise attack. Bayim was trapped between the forces inside and out. Upon seeing Xiao Qie's composure, he too assumed the main forces of Li Bei had followed him. A final glance into the distance made him sure. He could see obscure shadows behind those torches that seemed to stretch along the tall grass all the way to the far edge of the earth. Henry. I see you. Bayim didn't mean to repeat Hu Helu's mistakes. Pulling on the reins to urge his horse back, he gave the command to abandon the camp. The Biansha horsemen retreated with such haste that they didn't even collect Hu Helu's corpse before scattering into the night. Xiao Qie stopped where he was. Tantai Hu gave chase with his men and put on a good show, shouting and baying for blood as he pursued them for a mile in the dark. When he was certain Bayim didn't dare turn around, he silently called back his men and returned to 3rd Sand Camp. When Bayim finally looked again, he could still see those flickering torches extending into the distance. In fact, had he been willing to look a little more closely, or perhaps if he had been able to tamp down his panic, he would have realized that tonight's raid was odd in more ways than one. Hu Helu's abilities were cut above in every way, but as he himself knew, he was a general to be reckoned with when it came to battles in rough terrain. Sending him to guard a camp and wait on the defensive was a misuse of his talents. If he had heeded Bayim's advice and remained in 3rd Sand Camp instead of racing out, he could have swiftly dealt with the small infiltration force Gujin had led into the camp and gained the upper hand. With its gate shut, 3rd Sand Camp was an impenetrable fortress. Xiao Qie had no siege engines with which to attack its walls. There was no way his army could force its way in. However, following his recent string of victories, Hu Helu had become complacent. He was weak to trickery and deception. When he saw Gujin scaling the walls, he had assumed it was a raid from border camp, and when he saw the innumerable torches, he thought it was the Libe armored cavalry's reinforcements. By the time he saw Xiao Qie, he had been thrown into total disarray. He was defeated before the battle had even begun. Xiao Qie lifted Hu Helu's head. He scrutinized the stubble-roughened face for a moment, but couldn't place it. He handed the head to Tantai Hu, who refused to take it, so he passed it to Gujin instead. Clean up the bodies in the camp. Bury our brothers from Libe nearby, and bury the soldiers from Biansha farther away. The corpses can't be kept long in this heat. We don't want an epidemic. Gujin took the head and was stunned to see it was Hu Helu. He had never expected Xiao Qie to hack this general down on their very first encounter. Guo Weili had fought this man for half his lifetime, yet in the end, Xiao Qie had bested him in a night. What is it? Xiao Qie asked as he unbuckled Wolf's Fang. You know him? His name is Hu Helu, Gujin replied. Master, he's the one who put Guo Weili on the back foot in the north and occupied Tudalung Banner. Xiao Qie had been on the move for 2 nights in a row and had other matters to attend to, so he merely nodded before sending Gujin away to bury the dead. He called for Tantai Hu to join him and tossed Wolf's Fang to him as they headed inside together. This camp sure is big. Tantai Hu surveyed their surroundings and marveled. These walls might rival those of an actual city. There are great bows on the battlements and pitfalls at the foot. From here, you'd be able to fight off any attackers at close quarters or from afar. My brother spent a lot of money on this place. Xiao Qie looked up at the walls. Memorize the layout of those battlements. If there's anything you don't understand, ask Chen Yang or Gu Jin. I'll have the military craftsman get you a map of the camp tomorrow. You'll have to know that by heart, too. Tantai Hu hastily accepted his orders. Anyone with eyes could see Xiao Qie was planning to entrust Tantai Hu with some heavy responsibilities. Ever since they left Chudu, Xiao Qie had brought Tantai Hu along for every battle. Despite being barely literate, Tantai Hu had been trying to learn how to read from Chen Yang so he wouldn't let Xiao Qie down. This was his sincere effort to be worthy of his commander's recognition of his abilities. Xiao Qie wanted to first see the craftsman. He had laid the stakes out plainly for Wu Ziyu, but there was one thing he had chosen not to mention. He had no plans to return 3rd Sand Camp after reclaiming it. This place possessed the best of both offense and defense, and acted as a protective shield for border camp. It could provide Xiaofengshu with reinforcements to the north, and access the northeast provisions trail to the west. It was simply too convenient a location. Whoever wanted it back would have to come and negotiate with him in person. That's a power move. By the time Xiao Qie managed to lie down, dawn was lightening the sky in the east. He slept in the tent for several hours, during which time Chen Yang arrived from border camp, but did not disturb him. It was nearly dusk when Xiao Qie awoke again. As he stood outside the tent, bent at the basin to wash his face, he heard the sound of Meng returning. Xiao Qie secured his arm guard and whistled for Meng, who circled in the air briefly before landing on Xiao Chie's arm. Xiao Chie took out strips of meat from a leather bag and fed his bird. As Meng ate, he saw the large walnut tied to his leg. His lordship is well, Chen Yang laughed. He's letting you know he's safe and sound. But Xiao Chie didn't smile. In fact, he was quite displeased. He removed the walnut and weighed it in his hand for a moment before tossing it to Chen Yang. If he's sent Meng back like this, he's conveying his orders. Open it up and read it to me. The old man's up to no good. Chen Yang opened the walnut and smoothed out the paper tightly folded inside. Xiao Fengshu's handwriting was bold and wild. He wrote that he had long known Amor would send his men to Third Sand Camp, but made no mention of why advanced measures hadn't been taken. He also asked if Meng had secretly beaten up Yu, and commented that Meng was too combative, just like Xiao Chie. I was wondering about that, with what attacked Yu. I thought it was one of the Biancha birds, but I was a little bit confused at that part, so that's interesting. Finally, he told Xiao Chie not to act recklessly. He was to remain where he was and await orders. Xiao Chie turned the letter over with the finger, skimmed through the scrawled paragraphs on the front side, then pointed at a few concise sentences on the back. Chen Yang cleared his throat and read out in a steady voice. No one knows a son better than his father. By the time this letter arrives, it'll be too late. I know you'll definitely go for Third Sand Camp. In that case, you can handle the escort and transportation in Wu Ziyu's place, as the general in charge of supplies. It was dead silent all around. Tan Daihu had never met Xiao Fengshu. In his mind, even if the Prince of Libei refused to praise his second son, he still ought to send Xiao Chie to the battlefield. Letting Xiao Chie rack up honor and glory on the battlefield as soon as possible was the best recognition he could give him. In Li Bei's present situation, appointing Xiao Chie as a supply officer behind the scenes was akin to clipping the talons his son had brandished in Chudu. Had the Prince of Li Bei gone mad? Or would he really hide Xiao Chie away for another 9 years to appease the heir's supporters? Xiao Chie pressed his lips into a tight line and endured the silence for a while. Without a word, he turned aside to watch the sun once again setting in the west. Several days later, a caravan of traveling merchants set out from Cizhou and made their way south along the public road toward Chazhou. Kong Ling played the role of steward, while the embroidered uniform guard members disguised themselves as the attendants and servants of a wealthy family. Shen Zichun, using illness as a pretext, remained within the carriage and rarely showed himself. Kong Ling had brought along an official travel permit issued by Cizhou, which saved them a considerable amount of trouble along the way. In these troubled times, those who were able to obtain legitimate official documents could not be underestimated. Moreover, traveling as they did with a large number of guards, common bandits didn't dare rob them recklessly, lest they offend someone powerful. The beggars along the road multiplied tenfold after they left Cizhou. Children as young as 8 or 9 were seen panhandling in order to survive. They made all kinds of wild, exaggerated claims, even warning of immortals and monsters, in hopes of cajoling passing merchants into spending a bit of coin for peace of mind and safe passage. The first few days passed without incident, but toward the latter half of their journey, it rained, and the weather abruptly turned cold. Shen Zichun fell ill soon after. Swindlers and charlatans abounded in every town they passed, and shady shops lined the streets one after another. Even if Kongling dared call for a physician, Chao Tianya wouldn't let them within 3 feet of Chen Zichuan. Fortunately, his illness was not serious. His fever persisted for only 2 days before it slowly receded. Chen Zichuan was now spending more and more time hunched over his desk. It was inevitable that he neglected his martial arts training. After Qi Huilian's passing, he often found his body easily overwhelmed and became prone to falling ill with the changing of seasons. In truth, there had been warning signs even back in Chudu, when he had fallen so abruptly ill during the pox outbreak. The carriage rolled over the mud for days and arrived in Chazhou amid pouring rain. When Luo Mu, the prefect of Chazhou, received Kongling's visitation card, he was in his concubine's room. He turned it front to back several times, looking it over as though preparing to perform some magic trick. Still, he remained seated right where he was. His 14th concubine was new to his household. They had just held the wedding banquet a few days ago. As his most recent favorite, she was inevitably spoiled and pampered. The girl could read a few words. She took the letter from Luo Mu's hands and asked, "Who's Kongling?" Luo Mu pulled her onto his lap. Kongling, a dirt-poor scholar. In his early years, he was a subordinate of Tan Tai Long, the commander of the Dunzhou garrison troops. After the man died, he went to work for Zhou Gui. The concubine giggled as Luo Mu nuzzled her with his beard. As if afraid of being contaminated by poverty, she pinched the visitation card between her fingers with her pinky delicately extended. "Then how did he come to know my lord?" Luo Mu's tone was laced with self-mockery. "We were fellow students under the same teacher." "Oh my, then you'll have to be a good host to him." This concubine was always giving Luo Mu's principal wife a headache. She was the younger sister of Cai Yu, one of the bandits in Chazhou on whom Luo Mu relied for backing, and wanted nothing more than for Luo Mu to divorce his principal wife in her favor. Seeing a visit by outsiders as the perfect pretext to play hostess on her own, she flirtatiously swatted Luo Mu with the letter. "I'll host a banquet for you, and you can invite my elder brother here too, to put Suzhou in their place. I heard a portion of Li Bei's military grain came from Suzhou this year. These people have money." Instead of acquiescing, Luo Mu protested. "Why go to the expense of a banquet? We can dismiss him with a handful of cornmeal buns. Far from having money, he's probably here to borrow some. I won't see him." But the concubine wouldn't budge on her idea and threw a little tantrum, pouting like a spoiled child before Luo Mu. The letter slid to the ground as she whined. Luo Mu's eyes followed the letter as it fluttered down. He put a hand on his concubine's arm. "It's not too late to meet with him when we next go to Suzhou. Look, the letter has fallen. Pick it up." Seeing that her gentler attempts at persuasion had failed, she rose to her feet and threw a fit. Her delicate embroidered shoe landed right on the letter. She stomped a few more times and cried, "I haven't entertained any guests on my lord's behalf since I married into the family. All of us are formally wedded to you, so why am I always an afterthought? I swear." Before she could finish, she saw Luo Mu's expression turn frosty. "Move." Concubine Cai had been doted on since the day she had married Luo Mu. He had never raised his voice or scolded her. His rebuke came as a shock, and she shuddered before shuffling a few stunned steps back. Luo Mu bent to pick up the letter. There was a shoe print on it that couldn't be wiped clean. He stashed the letter away with a glum expression, then took Concubine Cai's hand and forced a smile. You don't need to concern yourself with affairs in the front hall. I'll have a proper chat with brother-in-law myself. I have to go. I'll come see you later." Without waiting for her to recover from her surprise, he lifted the curtain and strode out. The rain was still coming down outside. A servant opened up an umbrella, and Luomu briskly walked under it. "Is he still here? Invite him to the front hall. I'll see him now." When Luomu arrived, Kong Ling had been waiting for some time. Upon seeing Luomu heading up the steps, he rose to meet him. The two men smiled the moment they saw each other. Luomu gestured for Kong Ling to take a seat, and they proceeded to exchange pleasantries before getting down to business. "It's also at His Excellency's direction that I've come to see you." Kong Ling took a sip of tea. "In recent years, things in Suzhou have gradually improved. The fields are recovering, and there is an abundance of grain. However, the population in Suzhou has been in steep decline. We can't consume as much as we produce. If we store the remaining grain for a year, it's likely to grow mold or end up gnawed on by mice." Luomu listened attentively as Kong Ling spoke, noting his healthy complexion and his very few strands of white hair. Kong Ling met Luomu's gaze and gave him another smile. "So we were thinking. The prefecture of Chazhou has been buying grain from Hezhou and Jueshi at high prices for years. You must know you're getting badly ripped off. Why not work something out between our two prefectures? We're close to each other, so transport will also be convenient. We're willing to offer you a price lower than what you can get from Jueshi. What do you think?" With a start, Luomu realized there were wrinkles around Kong Ling's eyes now when he smiled. Looking as though he'd awakened from a dream, he averted his gaze and thought for a moment before saying, "I see your point. It's a good idea, but it can't be done." Clearly Kong Ling still had more to say, but Luomu raised a hand to stop him. "Chazhou is not Suzhou. It's courageous indeed of Zhou Gui to get up and put his plans to action, but how much of his courage was built upon the support of his father-in-law? Suzhou is only in the position it is today because Lord Liu resolved years ago to eradicate the bandits in Suzhou. That isn't the case here." Kong Ling had expected this. He fell silent for a spell, then said, "Mengzheng, is there no chance at all?" Hello, chapter title. On hearing Kong Ling speak his courtesy name, Luomu hastily turned his face aside. Kong Ling recognized that Luomu was in a difficult spot. He continued, "Suzhou has rebuilt its garrison troops. If this deal goes through, we're willing to lend our assistance to the vital task of eradicating the bandits in Chazhou. Mengzheng, the world is in turmoil, and heroes and villains of all sorts will no doubt rise from among the people. As long as you live among them, you can't stay clear of the conflict. You and I have been friends since we were students together, and share the bond of learning under the same teacher. Why not use this opportunity to free yourself from the influence of the bandits? You and Zhou Gui are in Suzhou. How can you understand what I'm dealing with here?" Luomu turned back to Kong Ling. "If the bandits in Chazhou are so easy to dispose of, why didn't you come to me all those years ago instead of going to work for Zhou Gui?" Before Kong Ling could explain, Luomu had risen to his feet. "At the moment, our grain is all purchased at high prices from Jueshi and Hezhou. Various bandit chiefs have a hand in this business, and everyone takes a cut of the profit. You want me to buy grain from Suzhou instead. But that means cutting off the bandit's source of income. This is an impossible deal. If word of this gets out, you and I will both be in danger. You should go back." After summoning an attendant to see the guest out, Luomu took a few steps out the door, then turned back to glance at Kong Ling. They hadn't seen each other for many years. Strangely enough, no matter how old Kongling looked now, the way he had looked as a student remained firmly etched in Luomu's mind. Wind blew the rain under the eaves and dampened Luomu's shoulders, yet he stood unmoving as the moments stretched. Kongling had missed plenty in his life, and he could feel this moment slipping away too. Unable to see Luomu's face clearly with the sunlight behind him, he merely said, "I am determined to succeed. If we can't reach an agreement today, I'll return tomorrow. Mengzheng, I'm confident we can make this work as long as you're willing to discuss it with us." Luomu was dumbstruck. "Who else did you bring with you that you're bold enough to say this? You showed official paperwork from Suzhou when you entered the city, and you delivered your visitation card to meet me. You've already exposed yourself. I'd advise you not to act rashly. Lie low for a few days, then go back to Suzhou like I told you." Without waiting for Kongling to reply, he lifted his robe and went down the steps. Later, as Shen Zichuan took his medicine and listened to Chao Tianya's report of the two men's conversation, he couldn't help but turn and give Chao Tianya a speaking look. Chao Tianya nodded in understanding. They were fellow students for many years. Naturally, they share a close friendship. In Master's view, how should we negotiate this deal? Luomu is an interesting character. Although Chazhou is a mess, his position as prefect remains unshakable. We'll negotiate however we must. Shen Zichuan's nose was still congested, and his speech sounded slightly muffled. Since he's still standing, it means he has set his mind to remain so. Of what he said today, half were empty words. We must find out which of them are sincere. That's the end of the chapter. I have been feeling like I have to sneeze for the past several pages, but I kept thinking like, oh, it's going to happen, and then it just didn't. So I don't know what's going on with that. I would love to just be able to like sneeze and get it over with, but it's like not happening right now. Alas, I will continue. We are on page 261 for chapter 135, which is called Earring. The rain stopped the next day, but the sky was still blanketed in gray clouds. Concubine Cai, after being rebuked the day before, claimed illness before dawn and remained in her chambers. Luomu had not slept well either. After his breakfast, a servant came to report that Cai Yu had sent him an invitation to a small gathering. Luomu accepted, knowing full well the purpose behind Cai Yu's summons. He wiped his hands. Without even changing his robe, he said, "Prepare the sedan. I'll go over now. Let's not keep my brother-in-law waiting." Cai Yu is a prominent bandit in Chazhou, whom even Yan Heru of Hezhou addressed as Pa. He was generous with his money and made a point of offering financial assistance to various smaller bandits, and thus had a warm reputation among them as a loyal and righteous man who was always ready to help. However, he did not get along with Lei Chongming from Mount Luo, though no one could say why. All they knew was that before Lei Chongming's death, neither one would acknowledge the other's existence during the bandits' gatherings and feasts. By the time Luomu arrived at the Cai Manor, Cai Yu had treated his guests to a round of food and drinks. Cai Yu's manor was even more luxuriously appointed than Luomu's, and kept running by more than 1,000 servants. However, he was not a man who was particular about formalities. Most of his visitors were bandits and robbers. The gatherings he held were lusty feasts that boasted all manner of roast meats and strong drink. The moment Cai Yu saw Luo Mu, he leaned back in his chair and beckoned him over with a smile. Meng Zheng, you're late. As punishment, you have to drink 3 cups of wine. Come, take a seat. Luo Mu had always been submissive before Cai Yu. He complied at once and settled himself. Even when he saw the unusually dressed strangers at the table, he asked no questions. Cai Yu waited for Luo Mu to finish his drinks before speaking. I heard my little sister displeased you yesterday. Looking panicked, Luo Mu started, Brother, you were right to tell her off. Cai Yu laid a heavy hand on Luo Mu's arm and said with a smile, You're her husband. The man is in charge of the front hall. There are plenty of things that are none of her business. She's been spoiled at home, and it seems getting married didn't teach her any better. In the future, you just tell her off when you need to. Don't hold back on my account. Her tantrums are getting out of hand. Cai Yu spoke of what had happened in Luo Mu's inner chambers as if he'd been there himself. His hand on Luo Mu's arm didn't apply much pressure, but it was precisely this light touch that showed the scope of his control. If he told Luo Mu to head left, Luo Mu wouldn't dare go right. Luo Mu was an official who had passed the imperial examinations to enter government service in Chudu the proper way, and had undergone official reviews before receiving this government post. But what did any of that matter? In Chazhou, Luo Mu was nothing but a yes man. Out here, heaven was high, and the emperor was far. Such remote cities were beyond the reach of central authorities. Banditry in Zhongbo had been a serious issue as far back as the reign of Yongyi. Before the fall of Zhongbo, the bandits here didn't give 2 hoots about their lord Shen Wei, Prince of Jianxing. And after the massacre of the cities, they gave even less of a damn about anything, or anyone, from Chudu. A sheen of sweat covered Luo Mu's brow. Satisfied with this reaction, Cai Yu retracted his hand and laughed. Do you know, I've been hearing such bizarre news. Half a month ago, I heard there was going to be a new emperor on the dragon throne in Chudu. That chief commander of the embroidered uniform guard, Han Chung, was so anxious he scampered back to his hometown to dig up some child to be the imperial heir. Well, who would have expected Secretariat Elder Hyde to get so upset over it, he bashed his head into a column in the Great Hall and killed himself. The way I heard it, blood and brains splattered all over Han Chung, and he got so scared he pissed himself right there. Everyone burst out laughing. The rumors circulating in Zhongbo had long rendered Han Chung as a sniveling scoundrel who bowed and scraped before the throne's authority. After Cai Yu was done laughing, he huffed out a long sigh. Even though we bandits make shady deals and work outside of the law, we value loyalty and benevolence as much as any man. I have nothing but respect for the Secretariat Elder for what he did. As the saying goes, men who wield swords die in battles, while men who wield brushes die in remonstrations. Our great Zhou has been through 3 rulers in such a short time. Emperors are dying one after another, and upright ministers like Secretariat Elder Hai are rarer by the day. Luo Mu listened in silence, never looking up from his bowl. He seemed wholly focused on eating, though he only dared pick at the food set right before him, lest he draw attention to himself. Although he was dignified in appearance, his behavior gave the impression of someone weak and cowering. Cai Yu did not look at Luo Mu again. He was speaking with gusto now. But I bet even the Secretariat Elder himself didn't expect the throne he kept from the Han clan's child to go to a woman. Have you ever heard of such a thing since the founding of our great Zhou? Is this not a violation of the natural order, an upending of yin and yang? This is an omen, signaling the collapse of the empire. I'd rather follow the orders of an ignorant child than a woman. How can any red-blooded man pay obeisance to a woman? Sure, Qidong has Qi Juyin, but if you ask me, she just happened to be in the right place at the right time and took advantage of the Empress Dowager being in power. Otherwise, where would she get off being a marshal? If Chudu has a female emperor next, ugh, what a mess. Oh, Lord. A chorus of agreement rose all around. One man with a beard smacked the table and said, Elder Tai is right. That's just what it is. What the hell even is a female emperor? The last few emperors were awful indeed, but the law of heaven is just as Lao Tzu Xiansheng said. There is a footnote. Lao Tzu, a Chinese philosopher considered the founder of Taoism and author of the classic Tao Te Ching. The law of heaven is just as Lao Tzu Xiansheng said. The man is in charge of administration. There's no way I'll let myself be ruled by a woman. Even if the entire court of civil and military officials bends their knees and pays her obeisance as subjects to a monarch, well, that just makes them a nest of sniveling cowards. It's no wonder they've let the 12 tribes of Biansha harass us all these years. When it comes to women, marrying and keeping the home are their duties, Cai Yu agreed. No harm done if we dote on them a little and raise them into pampered, delicate ladies. But if you let them go out and fight battles or lead the government, it's a disaster waiting to happen. He sighed with emotion. I heard the students in Chudu are all for her. I'd say all that studying turned them stupid. They can't even tell right from wrong. Their conversation ranged from the political battles in Chudu to the military affairs in Qidong, and then to the ongoing war in Libei. Finally, the topic landed on Lei Chongming. The bearded man spoke up again. Lei Chongming was another one who got a lucky break. He just happened to be in the right spot to help Yan Gongza out when he was in distress. A man like him would never have lasted long. He was too ambitious. He wanted to establish a regular army in Mount Law. Well, sure enough, the Imperial Army went and took him down. Cai Yu snorted coldly. The man next to him said, Elder Tai and Lei Chongming were hailed as the twin heroes of Zhongbo. But how does Lei Chongming deserve such an honor? He never even came close to our Elder Tai. Cai Yu was unmoved by this flattery. He spread his arms wide and sank comfortably back into the chair. Do you know why I turned my nose up at Lei Chongming? Because I find him filthy. The maid-servant came over with his pipe, and he took 2 puffs before continuing. Lei Chongming worked as an armed escort for merchant caravans in his earlier years. Everyone knows that part, but do you know why he stopped? He claimed it was because he married his younger sister off to the Zhu family in Duanzhou, and wanted to retire and live in comfort. But that's not it. You see, he had a particular vice. At some point, Luomu had set aside his chopsticks. Blowing out a cloud of smoke, Cai Yu continued. When I first took up this trade and was ready to strike out on my own, my Shifu told me one must be a righteous man, even as a bandit or a robber. There are some things you must not touch. Depraved acts will bring you bad karma. Plenty of traveling merchants with families come through Chazhou, but I've never laid my hands on any of the widows or orphans I've come across. But not Lei Chongming. He used to accompany some families as an armed escort. One time, when he was on a job in Dongzhou, the man of the house died in the middle of the journey, leaving a hapless orphan and a widow who couldn't even afford to pay his wages. When they arrived in Dongzhou, the man's family only wanted their grandson, not the daughter-in-law. The woman was unwilling to part with her child and planned to kill herself in desperation. Lei Chongming brought the mother and son back home with him, saying he'd provide for them both. I was still a young robber in Chaozhou at the time. When I heard about this incident, I thought, what a man. I felt Lei Chongming was different from people like me. He was the kind of chivalrous hero my Shifu spoke of. I thought highly of him, and I always kept an eye out for him when I was on the road working. I wanted to find a chance to become sworn brothers with the man. But later, when I went to Dongzhou, I heard he quit. When I tracked him down, I learned both the woman and child had died. How did they die, you ask? He brutalized them after drinking one night. He laid his hands on a child no more than 6 years of age. The woman resisted, so he beat her to death. The child was tormented beyond recognition and died just a few days after his mother. Cai Yu waved away the smoke and frowned as he gestured for the maidservant to take the pipe away. When he popped up again in Duanzhou, this vice of his didn't change. Lei Chongming valued his reputation, so he never dared indulge too openly. Young Master Yan was very young when Lei Chongming saved him. I was friends with old Master Yan back then, and the Yan clan had helped me out a time or two. Even though I hadn't met the young master back then, I thought of him as my own treasured child. When I heard Lei Chongming had him, I ran for 4 days and nights without rest to get to Mount Law and get him back. The young master wore a bright jade earring at the time, a gift from his family, making him look all the more precious. He was smart as a whip, too. The second he saw me, he called me Pa. It was hard not to feel protective of the kid. Since the young master seemed unharmed, I didn't bother pushing the point with Lei Chongming. Yet afterward, Lei Chongming had felt self-conscious every time he encountered Cai Yu. He knew Cai Yu looked down on him, so he stayed away. They each kept to themselves. And the young master is a good kid. He was grateful to Lei Chongming for saving him, so he helped the bandits of Mount Law more than a few times. Cai Yu had meant to ask Luo Mu about Kong Ling today, but he'd gotten carried away recounting the past. By the time he remembered, Luo Mu had taken his leave. Luo Mu climbed into his sedan and headed for the cosmetics shop, hoping to buy some of the rouge that was all the rage in Chudu to pacify concubine Cai. The largest cosmetics shop in Chaozhou was owned by a merchant from Jueshi, and Luo Mu was a regular there. Almost before he stepped off the sedan, the shopkeeper was coming out to welcome him and serve him tea. He bent toward Luo Mu and said, "Apologies, Your Excellency. Unfortunately, we're short on stock today. All our best powders are being prepared in the shop on the east end of the city and won't be here for some time. What if we delivered them to your residence tomorrow? Would that be all right?" Luo Mu nodded and turned to leave when he recalled the way Cai Yu had pressed down on his arm earlier. Changing his mind, he looked back and asked, "Which shop on the east end?" The shopkeeper called over a runner to personally lead the way for Luo Mu. Upon arrival, Luo Mu noted that while the eastern shop was not large, its location was close to the horse paths used to transport cargo, and convenient for loading and unloading goods. Only a few people were browsing inside. The runner led him further in, to a courtyard at the back of the shop, then served him tea and asked him to wait. Luo Mu sat for a long time. When the hanging screen lifted at last, it was Kong Ling who walked through. Astonished, Luo Mu started, "What are you?" In lieu of an answer, Kong Ling held up the curtain and stepped aside, making way for a man in white, who ducked slightly to enter. The instant Shen Zichuan raised his head, Luo Mu rose to his feet. Shen Zichuan had come in a sedan, and was neat and dry despite the pouring rain. He gestured for Luo Mu to sit. Behind him, Chao Tianya stepped forward and switched out the tea for a fresh pot, then handed a steaming cup to Shen Zichuan. Seeing Luo Mu still standing, Kong Ling began, "Meng Zheng, this is Vice Commander Shen." Luo Mu bowed respectfully. "I've long heard the Vice Commander's reputation. This pupil Luo Meng Zheng is glad to receive your wise teachings." Mr. Chung Feng has spoken highly of Lord Luo's prudence and excellent judgment. Today, I've seen the truth in his words. Shen Zichuan smiled faintly. "I am no longer the Vice Commander of the Embroidered Uniform Guard. Without an authority token or an official post, I'm merely a common man. It is I who should be paying my respects to your excellency." But how could Luo Mu dare let this man bow to him? Shen Zichuan had served as an official just steps from the emperor's side. His position as northern judge of the Embroidered Uniform Guard alone was enough to strike fear into the hearts of the prefects of Zhongbo. In the past, the Embroidered Uniform Guard had worked with the Ministry of Justice, the Court of Judicial Review, and the Chief Surveillance Bureau to audit the accounts in the provincial administrations and review the officials' accomplishments. Furthermore, Shen Zichuan was known to be on good terms with Chen Yu of the Chief Surveillance Bureau and Kong Cho of the Ministry of Justice. Luo Mu had more than merely heard of him. Ostensibly, the objective of assigning officials like Luo Mu to posts outside the capital was for them to gain experience. After collecting some political achievements and establishing their credentials, they would be eligible for promotion to an official position in the capital of Chudu. The results of their reviews as an official, the lives of their whole family, lay in the hands of men like Shen Zichuan. It was evident why Luo Mu called himself this pupil. Shen Zichuan was unlike the high-ranking officials of the Embroidered Uniform Guard who had preceded him. He had an unconventional beginning. His father was Shen Wei, notorious for allowing the Bianshao horsemen to slaughter Zhongbo. When he entered the capital 6 years ago, he had been escorted by the Embroidered Uniform Guard, who had collected him from the Libei Armored Cavalry as a prisoner. All the rumors had said he would be executed. Yet not only had he survived, he had been repeatedly promoted by the Tianquan Emperor, defying all rules and traditions. The position of northern judge concerned both factions in Chudu, and yet even Hai Liangyi had given his assent. On top of this, he had achieved it all at such a young age, which was intimidating in and of itself. Only now did Luo Mu understand that Kong Ling hadn't been putting on airs when he said he was confident of success. He was genuinely certain, and this young man was why. Fortunately for Luo Mu's nerves, Shen Zichuan was simply making conversation, and didn't actually rise to pay his respects. Luo Mu collected himself, but still didn't dare sit. He stood beside Kong Ling with his hands politely at his sides and said, "Please excuse this pupil for not welcoming your excellency after you personally came all this way to Chazhou. I'll send someone at once. I followed the Marquis of Dingdu out of the capital. I am now a traitor to Chudu. There's truly no need for your excellency to stand on ceremony." Shen Zichuan took a sip of hot tea to soothe his sore throat. "I've been in Zhongbo for some time now, and I've long wanted to meet Lord Luo. I'm fortunate to have Mr. Chung Feng to make introductions for me today." Kong Ling looked at Luo Mu and smiled. "Meng Zheng, there's no need to be so formal. The vice commander has been our staunchest supporter in Suzhou. One of the reasons he's come is to help resolve the issue of bandits in Chazhou. We're all on the same side here." Luo Mu eyed Kong Ling, his gaze a little more restrained compared to yesterday's. He asked cautiously, "How did you know I'd come here?" "Chazhou is only so big. One can discover many things with just a little asking around. That 14th concubine of yours has strong family backing and a temper to boot, and she loves been your habit to please others by taking note of what they like. It was easy to guess you'd make a personal trip here to pacify the lady. Kong Ling turned to Shen Zichuan with a smile and shook his head. The vice commander ought to know that Meng Zheng was very popular with the girls in his student days, and a notorious flirt. He was an expert in flattery, even before he became an official. Luo Mu relaxed slightly when Kong Ling brought up old times. I conducted myself with decorum while studying. When would I have the chance to flirt when I was with you all day long? The way I remember it, it was you who had countless friends and called everyone your brother. Their familiar banter eased the atmosphere. Kong Ling gestured for Luo Mu to take a seat. Oh, is my signal okay? Did it blip in and out for anybody else? You can hear me okay? Henry, did you miss anything I said? I am seeing the video looking a little bit fuzzy right now, and I don't know why it's doing that. Like, only on the live streaming end. Okay. I will continue then. If I can figure out where I was. Shen Zichuan sat in the seat of honor, yet when he spoke, it wasn't with the overbearing attitude Luo Mu had expected. I'm sure Mr. Chongfeng has shared the purpose of our trip here. You two didn't have time for a thorough discussion yesterday, so it's understandable that Your Excellency has misgivings. Please speak freely today. We can discuss any difficulties you may have. He was gentle in his speech, his countenance natural and at ease. But despite Shen Zichuan's choice of words, there was clearly no room for discussion here. Beneath this placid facade was an unshakable resolve to grasp what he wanted. This final remark was all it took for Luo Mu to understand Shen Zichuan's intent. Discuss any difficulties you may have. But what was the purpose of discussion? To facilitate action. Shen Zichuan left Luo Mu no opening to refuse at all. The moment he opened his mouth, he had made it clear that Luo Mu had no choice. When Luo Mu looked up again, his timidity was gone. If the vice commander can quell the bandits in Chazhou, I am willing to follow your lead. However, Cai Yu is no Lei Chongming, nor is the vice commander the Marquis with his 20,000 mighty soldiers. I'm afraid the strength of a single man may not be enough. Shen Zichuan was unruffled. Fear not. Our meeting today is as good as 1,000,000 mighty soldiers. That's curious. That's, Nina, was there a mention of the earring? In this chapter, there was a mention of the child from the Yan family, I believe. Where was that? The Yan clan, Lei Chongming saved young Master Yan. And then, Cai Yu was like, uh-oh, that doesn't sound good because it's Lei Chongming. But he didn't end up actually doing anything about it. And they said that the young master wore a bright jade earring at the time, a gift from his family. So, I feel like that person, the young master from the Yan clan, that Lei Chongming might have been had in his care at some point. That, I feel like that's going to be an important character. But I really don't know. I've got no ideas other than that. Like, head empty. I'm like, this is interesting. I don't really know what it means. So, I think now is a good time to take a break. So I'm going to go for about 10 minutes. And when I come back, we will be on page 273 for chapter 136, which is called Sowing Discord. Another great chapter title. Hello, I am back. So we are on chapter 136, Sowing Discord. Shen Zichuan spoke with such confidence because he knew Chazhou was not a place that could be won through sheer military might. During the reign of Yongyi, Dunzhou and Duanzhou had been the richest and most prosperous prefectures in Zhongbo. Shen Wei had commanded the garrison troops of all the prefectures, yet even with money and soldiers, he still failed to eradicate the bandits of Chazhou. Before Shen Zichuan had embarked on this journey, Zhou Gui and his advisors in Suzhou had prepared a detailed report on the subject, and came to the unanimous conclusion that Chazhou must be won with statecraft, not force. Cai Yu was indeed no Lei Chongming. The biggest difference between the bandits of Chazhou and the bandits of Mount Luo was that those in Chazhou were still highwaymen in the true sense of the word. Meanwhile, those on Mount Luo had banded together and established their own rule in their territory, even making plans for expansion. It was clear that Lei Jingzhe, who had hidden behind Lei Chongming for years, was no longer satisfied with being merely a bandit. He desired to cast off his old self and seek legitimacy, while Cai Yu did not. Hence, Suzhou had to fight the bandits of Mount Luo and scheme against those in Chazhou. Luo Mu was perhaps not as devoted as Zhou Gui was to serving the people. But since Shen Zichuan didn't stop Kongling from visiting him the day before, Luo Mu knew they must need him. He had served as the prefect of Chazhou for over 10 years. No one understood the ins and outs of the prefecture better than him. Your Excellency was assigned to Chazhou during the reign of Yongyi, Shen Zichuan observed. In that time, you've accomplished quite a list of political feats, and you appealed strongly to Shen Wei to suppress the bandits. However, Chazhou was too far from Dunzhou, and with Fanzhou standing between the two prefectures, Shen Wei found it both too troublesome and expensive for his troops to travel so far. In his mind, the odds of success were minute. He struck down Your Excellency's request. Shen Zichuan didn't so much as blink as he spoke his father's name. I noticed that since that time, Your Excellency's approach to governing began to change. Luo Mu waved a hand. What political achievements do I have to my name? The vice commander speaks too highly of me. I have accomplished nothing since my arrival in Chazhou. During the reign of Yongyi, Chazhou was notorious for its bandits. Back then, when Chudu was considering which officials to dispatch to the regions outside the capital, Jiang Qingshan and I were both among those they assigned. When I first arrived here, I had a mind to accomplish great things, but it was simply too difficult. His expression gradually grew solemn. During my first 2 years, I tried to revive the garrison troops. Although Shen Wei didn't approve, he didn't stop me either. The Ministry of War thought it was feasible. They increased Chazhou's military expenses according to the recommendations I made in my memorial, and I started equipping Chazhou's garrison. I was ambitious then, wholeheartedly focused on suppressing the bandits. It was only when the real fighting began that I realized how wrong I'd been. Bandits have been a problem for Chazhou since before the reign of Yongyi. Long before the garrison troops were established, there was a group of bandits here. In its earliest days, Hezhou wasn't as prosperous as it is now, and the Yan clan hadn't yet made its fortune. The traders who came through here were mostly wealthy merchants from the 13 cities of Jueshi, and the bandits of Chazhou made their living by robbing these merchants or kidnapping them for ransom. By the time the imperial court perceived the severity of the problem, it was too late. The bandits had already put down roots in Chazhou and flourished into various gangs and factions. As a result, the population of Chazhou was rowdy and barely constrained by the rule of law. Implementing the Yellow Register here had proved an exceptional challenge, as almost half the people had been bandits at one point or another. Because they could not be considered decent civilian citizens, it seemed the only option was to register them as military households. When the officials of the Eastern Palace deliberated over this, they determined it would be best if these people were absorbed into the military and made part of a proper army. With military fields to tend and a monthly salary, they could maintain a decent livelihood and feed their families. There would be no more need for them to turn to highway robbery. At the same time, the officials could regulate the movement of the people, keeping them in Chazhou to farm in peace instead of allowing them to run to and fro making trouble for the empire, which would in turn strengthen the governing capabilities of Chazhou's prefect. In this, however, the officials of the Eastern Palace made a fatal mistake. They were armchair strategists, taking policies Zhongbo had used successfully in other prefectures and implementing them in Chazhou without adapting to local circumstances. The bandits of Chazhou were indeed incorporated into an official army, but the land wasn't as easy to cultivate as that in other areas. These men followed the rules for a short time, before they began to simply collect their army salary while continuing to rob people. They no longer even needed to forge documents of travel and access. They could loot and plunder under the guise of catching bandits. They chased after their own shadows, going round and round in circles with the imperial court. The prefects from the capital were ill-equipped to resist the established might of these local bandits, and Luomu was no exception. It wasn't long before reality dealt the bright-eyed new prefect a ruthless lesson. Yet this was not the end of it. In later years, bandit chiefs like Cai Yu emerged in Chazhou. They spoke of the chivalry and righteousness of the martial arts world, and were generous with their riches, willing to lend a hand to like-minded brothers. Over time, their fame spread, and they grew far more popular and admired than the dull and inflexible scholars sent to manage them. The prefect became nothing more than a figurehead, ruling the prefecture in name only. By this point, Shen Zichuan thought he understood why Shen Wei hadn't been willing to deploy troops. He didn't have the nerve. Shen Wei had been conferred the title of Prince of Jianxing, but it was just that, a nice-sounding title. At heart, he was just as much of an outsider as an assigned official like Luomu. He had neither opposed nor supported Luomu's proposals at the start of Luomu's tenure, because he was adopting a wait-and-see approach. If Luomu's measures succeeded, then he could follow his lead. If Luomu failed, he could hold him accountable. He was unwilling to step up to the fore and defend the bandits of Chazhou himself, because he understood one thing very well. Compared to Luomu, Tai Yu and his ilk were the real rulers of Chazhou. But things are different now. Shen Zichuan's throat was slightly hoarse, and he coughed for a moment. Tai Yu is living off the beneficence of the Yan clan, and the money he makes is wrung from the tears and blood of the people. Established bandits like him build their wealth on the backs of suffering refugees. Plenty live well inside the city of Chazhou, but the cost is told in the commoners lying dead from starvation along the roads beyond the city walls. Over time, the common folk will come to resent those like him. Allow me to speak plainly. Luomu weighed his options, then continued cautiously. After the fall of Zhongbo, the supply of grain in Chazhou shrank, and what remains is pathetic. When the Grand Secretariat transferred the contents of the granaries in the various prefectures to Jueshi in the name of disaster relief, it was supposed to be a loan. But Shenwei was dead, and Chudu never sent anyone to take his place governing Zhongbo. The 6 prefectures each governed themselves. Simply surviving was an uphill battle, and no one had the time or energy to pursue the debt owed to us by Chudu. They couldn't afford to pursue it. Recent years have seen a rise in law-abiding families turning to crime from sheer desperation. Starving and with no other options, these people have little choice but to sink to banditry. At first, Tai Yu's bandits in Chazhou provided assistance to the poor. But later, the Yan clan of Hezhou saw an opportunity to get into the business of selling grain here, and made use of Tai Yu's influence to push the Shi clan's businesses out of Zhongbo. They joined hands, and all made a big fortune. Tai Yu's sitting on a mountain of gold in his old age, and he's grown increasingly fond of the sound of flattery. Gradually, he lost the chivalrous heart he once had. He tore down the porridge tents and grain shops he had set up outside the city for the needy, and grew comfortable as the local emperor of Chazhou. Resentful voices filled the streets, but nothing could be done. He is no longer the man he used to be. Yet even when the mighty fell, they held more power than the common man. Tai Yu still had influence in the south of Zhongbo and in Hezhou. The fact that Yan Heru addressed him as Pa also carried weight. It was almost impossible for the smaller bandit factions Luomu had privately funded to make a mark. He could only anxiously watch as Chazhou's food supplies dwindled, helpless to act. A brief silence fell over the room. The half-open windows offered a glimpse of orange jasmine, white petals adorned with drops of rain. The sky was overcast. Quite a while had passed since he had set out on this errand, and Luomu couldn't dawdle here much longer. Despite the open windows, Shen Zichuan found the room stuffy. The cup of tea in his hands had gone cold. When he spoke at last, it was to say something that seemed to contradict all that had come before. If Tai Yu is wise, he should understand that the so-called resentful voices filling the streets are merely underhanded tricks by the other gangs. As his brother-in-law, Your Excellency ought to give him a reminder or two in this regard. Luomu was taken aback. He didn't understand what Shen Zichuan meant. Shen Zichuan brushed the tea foam aside with the white, jade-like lid of the cup. With Lei Chongming's death, Tai Yu will become the most renowned bandit chief in all of Zhongbo. This is the perfect moment while he's in high spirits. When it comes to Chazhou and the Yan clan, he won't tolerate anyone else getting a slice of his pie. What's more, Twilight Years, is not being the man he once was. If he thinks the wrath of the people is the underhanded work of younger up-and-comers, he won't let them get away with it. In a flash, Luo Mu understood. He couldn't help but marvel at how ruthless a move this was. Shen Zichuan wished for Cai Yu to regard public wrath as infighting between his gangs, intentionally incited by his enemies. If he believed this to be true, he would intensify his efforts to suppress the smaller bandits in order to guard his wealth. The smaller bandits were already discontented. Should Cai Yu come down hard on them now, their discontent would grow. As long as resentment festered between the two sides, it would be hard for them to join forces again. They might even turn on each other without any outside prompting. The smaller gangs Your Excellency previously funded in secret can be put to good use here. Once they've taken a beating from Cai Yu, you can give them a helping hand and a generous gift of grain. Gather them up as brothers who will bond in a time of adversity. Shen Zichuan finished his tea and motioned for Chao Tianya to refill it. He glanced up at Luo Mu and continued, "When the small come together, they will be a force to be reckoned with. It's no different from a pack of jackals hunting their prey. We shouldn't fight him head on. Simply heap fuel on the fire and fan the flames." His words gave Luo Mu chills. Merely by dropping Cai Yu in a few hints, this man would incite Cai Yu to tear down the things he'd built with his own hands. Sowing discord was not an uncommon strategy, but Shen Zichuan had been in Chazhou a single night. How did he have such a clear picture of Cai Yu and Chazhou? Luo Mu couldn't help but recall Shen Zichuan's previous identity, a member of the embroidered uniform guard. Once we take Cai Yu off the board, we can discuss the trade of grain between our prefectures in detail, Shen Zichuan said calmly. In the future, Your Excellency's stoic endurance of shame and humiliation at the hands of the bandits will become an edifying anecdote in Chazhou. The full stomachs of the commoners will be Your Excellency's most distinguished political achievement. Even in the other prefectures, you'll be an official admired by all. Lord Luo, we'll meet again soon. Not long after Luo Mu left, it started raining again. Shen Zichuan rode in the carriage back to the manor where he was currently residing. When he stepped out and saw the heavy overcoat draped over Chao Tianya's arm, he commented, "The weather is still warm for now. There's no need for this. Why did you even bring it?" Tilting the umbrella toward Shen Zichuan, Chao Tianya said, "It wasn't my idea. Shifu specifically gave the instruction." Shen Zichuan strode through the door. He had asked Ge Qingqing, still far away in Jueshi, to purchase this estate under the guise of other business. It was old, cramped, and in a state of mild disrepair. The front porch was waterlogged, and a few flowers or bushes were planted. In the courtyard. Ever since I arrived in Zhongbo, I've been neglecting my physical training. I've made Shifu worry. When we return, don't tell him about my illness. Shen Zichuan glanced over his shoulder and smiled at Kong Ling as he spoke. This journey has also been hard on Mr. Chung Feng. Kong Ling hurriedly deflected the acknowledgement. Earlier, the orange jasmine outside the window looked so verdant after the rain. It's very soothing on the eyes, Shen Zichuan said offhandedly. Let's plant some in the residence when we get back. As they started up the steps, they saw Fei Sheng, who had been waiting just inside, step out to greet them. Not daring to be sloppy in his work, he greeted Shen Zichuan with a smile. Master has returned at long last. Looks like you have some good news to report, Shen Zichuan remarked. Master is wise. Fei Sheng lifted the hanging screen for Shen Zichuan. Before I set off, I received some items the Marquis sent from Li Bei. Knowing their importance, I dared not stop on the journey and hurried the whole way here to deliver it. The man loved to speak in this ingratiating tone. Chao Tianya laughed out loud. As he followed them in, he teased, I always find it interesting when Fei the 10th comes. Quite amusing. There is a footnote for Fei the 10th. Like Xiao Chuye's nickname of Xiao R, this moniker suggests that Fei Sheng is the 10th son in his family. Shen Zichuan removed the wide-sleeved outer robe he wore. Let me see. Ignoring Chao Tianya, Fei Sheng took the items from his subordinate and presented them to Shen Zichuan. Shen Zichuan touched the leather sack. It was cold. The Marquis sent someone to deliver it to our manor. He specifically instructed that it be kept on ice. We hadn't any ice at home, so we had to borrow from Lady Zhou. A pity the ice didn't last the journey and melted soon after we set out. Shen Zichuan was curious, but he didn't let it show before the others. He pinched the leather sack between his fingertips and noticed it seemed to be filled with liquid. He opened it, but before he could peer inside, he was hit with a sour, pungent smell. Chao Tianya was right beside him. Sniffing the air, he asked, Isn't this cow's milk? That can't be, Fei Sheng said in puzzlement. Why would the Marquis send milk all that way? It can't be kept overnight. It's spoiled. They looked at Shen Zichuan, but Shen Zichuan didn't mind the smell. The corner of his lips lifted slightly in a smile. Sensing their eyes on him, he looked askance at them and asked, What? Who would dare answer him? Shen Zichuan closed the leather sack and opened another box in the parcel. As expected, it held loose tea leaves. He stood for a moment and let out a soft sigh. He understood Xiao Chuye perfectly. To others, cow's milk was the same everywhere. But to Xiao Chuye, what came from Li Bei was unique and could never be replaced by anything else. He set aside his own portion, and despite knowing it wouldn't keep, he still wanted to send it to Shen Zichuan. What if it was somehow delivered on time and still drinkable? They ought to eat and drink all delicious things together. That was what Xiao Chuye had been thinking. Other people might not understand, but Shen Zichuan knew it very well. That's very sweet. Even though he delivered bad milk, it's still very sweet. He tried. He tried. He did say keep it on ice. Oh. We're on page 283 for chapter 137, which is called Letter Reading. Shen Zichuan sat down to write a letter in the main room as Chao Tianya and Fei Sheng took their leave. Fei Sheng was itching to smoke his pipe, but he didn't dare, even in the fresh air of the veranda. He worried it would reek of tobacco if Shen Zichuan called for him later. He worried he would reek of tobacco. He lingered for a moment. When he saw Chao Tianya had stopped as well, Fei Sheng guessed what he wanted to ask. Something on your mind, huh? Fei Sheng took a few steps and leaned against the railing. First, tell me, what kind of relationship do you have with that unpolished jade? We've met, but we're not close, Chao Tianya answered casually. But the more Chao Tianya tried to make light of the matter, the more suspicious Fei Sheng grew. Yao Wenyu isn't among the ranks of court officials. He's a civilian who spends most of his year traveling. Even the Helian Marquis finds it difficult to meet him. How did you encounter him? Too lightly, Chao Tianya said. Fate, I suppose. I didn't expect it myself. Isn't that why I told you to ask around for me? As Fei Sheng could get no details out of him, he gave up probing and reported, before Secretariat Elder Hai's demise, he wanted Yao Wenyu to leave Chudu and return to Jin Chung. the Yao clan's hometown. There are students of Grand Preceptor Yao there who could look after him on behalf of the Secretariat Elder. But Yao Wenyu didn't go. Chao Tianya uttered an "oh" and stood perfectly still under the eaves, watching the rain fall. Yao Wenyu probably realized Secretariat Elder Hai asked him to leave because he'd already made up his mind to die, Fei Sheng continued. He got in the carriage and circled around town before returning to the manor to wait for Secretariat Elder Hai to return from court. Instead, he got the news of Secretariat Elder Hai's death. Oh, Henry, that's right, Jincheng Lake. Yep, he said Jincheng is the name of the place. Arha trauma indeed. Droplets of rain dampened the toes of Chao Tianya's boots as he watched the mist rise in the courtyard. His gaze dropped to a puddle, and he regarded his own reflection. Fei Sheng paused for a moment, only continuing when Chao Tianya's expression stayed firmly unreadable. During Secretariat Elder Hai's funeral, tens of thousands of people came to pay their respects. Yao Wenyu was his only official student, and he conducted the funeral for the Secretariat Elder as a son would for his own father. A few days later, when the students from the Imperial College rioted, all of Yao Wenyu's books were torn up. If not for Kong Cho hiding him in time, he may very well have ended up ripped to shreds by the students himself. But ever since the revelation of the Emperor's daughter, he seems to have vanished into thin air. My informers in Chudu could find no trace of him. Chao Tianya looked up. Vanished. Just so. Fei Sheng lifted a hand from the banister and drew a circle in the air. When I escaped Chudu with you, I lost contact with my informants. I only re-established correspondence a short while ago. By then, Yao Wenyu had already disappeared. The embroidered uniform guard knows Chudu like the back of their hand. If my men say he disappeared, he's more likely dead. Absolutely not. No. Don't do that to us. Impossible. Chao Tianya refuted it immediately. If Kong Cho still hopes to revive the moderates, Yao Wenyu is a key figure. Whether for official or personal reasons, Kong Cho would never let him die. Fei Sheng watched Chao Tianya, waiting for him to finish. Then he said, "It's not just a wild guess. Hear me out. Initially, he was merely missing." Kong Cho and Chen Yu both looked for him, to no avail. He was last seen on Mount Bodhi, where Hai Liangyi was buried. When my men went up to investigate, they found an abandoned carriage and assumed he'd been kidnapped. But if it was an ordinary kidnapping, the perpetrators would approach Kong Cho to negotiate a ransom, or at the very least name the conditions for Yao Wenyu's release. That's the only way he could be useful as a hostage. But Kong Cho heard nothing at all. Not even the Yao clan back in Jincheng received any news of him. Chao Tianya frowned. If the Imperial College hadn't rioted, Yao Wenyu would have almost certainly become the new star of the moderates. But the Yao clan's name was dragged through the mud during the student riots. He no longer has the credibility to lead all the students in the land. He ought to have been a useless pawn in the eyes of Chudu. If he's dead, someone must have had a reason to kill him. But I can't see any need. Fei Sheng turned to face him. Exactly. He holds no official position or title, but he's still the sole lawful grandson of the Yao clan. Killing him would be more trouble than it's worth. I don't understand it myself. At that moment, Shen Zichuan called out to them. Chao Tianya lifted the hanging screen and disappeared inside. He did not broach the subject again. Yes, I'm gonna say that you're right, Henry. No body means he's fine. There's just some political fuckery happening. Cautious as he was, Luomu didn't bring anything up to Tai Yu directly. Instead, he humored his concubine and allowed her to accompany him to his study. His private correspondence, half-heartedly hidden, was almost instantly copied down by concubine Cai's maidservant and surreptitiously delivered into Tai Yu's hands. Upon seeing those letters, Tai Yu flew into a rage. He summoned Luomu to his residence and castigated him until he was blue in the face. "I thought you were an honest man. That's why I was willing to marry my sister to you. Have I ever failed to bail you out when you were in a tight spot? I treated you like a brother, yet you were scheming behind my back. Luomengjung, look at yourself. If it weren't for me, you'd never have gotten anywhere. You think you're some big shot?" Tai Yu was crude and uneducated, used to mixing with the lowest stratum of society. His curses brought Luomu to his knees before the table as he apologized. "You treat me so well, brother. How could I repay your kindness with enmity? These private letters all came to me anonymously. I have no idea who sent them. I've been so nervous and afraid, tossing and turning at night, and spending my days in a stupor, trying to find an opportunity to bring this up with you, brother." Enraged, Tai Yu tossed the letters onto the desk and pointed at Luomu. "What opportunity was there to find? You and I are just a courtyard apart. Have you been crippled? Is that why you can't walk over here? If I hadn't found out about this now, you would be in bed with them tomorrow." Tai Yu was so furious it was giving him heartburn. He stood up and took a few steps, smoothing his hand over his chest before continuing. "You're a real piece of shit, Luomengjung. And here I was wondering why there were so many people cursing me all of a sudden. Turns out you were all trying to stab me in the back. Shameless, filthy trash. Back when I made my name, you were drinking milk from your mother's tit. How much money have I spent supporting you, yet you turn around and bite the hand that feeds you? Why? Got greedy after seeing how much we're making from the grain business? Bah! You think any of you lot are worth a damn in this business? You think you can handle it?" Luomu was seized with terror. He moved to speak, but Tai Yu bellowed, "Stay on your knees. I show you due respect outside these walls, and do what I can to prop you up. Yet you take it for granted, and fraternize with these ingrates the moment I turn my back. I'm telling you, if not for my sister's love for you, you wouldn't walk out of this door alive today." Sweat was pouring from Luomu like rain. He kept his head lowered and said nothing. Tai Yu stood, sneering down at Luomu's sweat-soaked back. He had spent his younger years making a living on a knife's edge, and now that he was old, he'd finally settled down. There wasn't a single person who didn't respectfully address him as Elder Tai when he showed his face. All major and minor bandits of Zhongbo accorded him respect. Not even Lei Chongming, whom he had despised to the core, had dared put a toe out of line with him. Only after Luomu knelt for some time did Tai Yu's anger begin to fade. In his eyes, Luomu was a spineless man. If he had dared to keep those letters squirreled away for so long without doing anything, it was surely because he had been instigated to join this folly by the other party. Whoever it was, they were devious, trying to work their plot through the people closest to him. At this thought, Tai Yu's heart, which had been fluttering with trepidation, burned with hateful anger. He had always seen himself as a generous man. Though it was true he'd taken a large cut of the profits from the grain trade, he always set something aside for those under him so they wouldn't starve. These people didn't know the meaning of gratitude. "Since they treat me with such heartlessness, I have no choice but to reciprocate in kind." Tai Yu sat beside the window where the light seeped through. He said ominously, "Those insatiable, greedy upstarts are garter snakes trying to devour an elephant. I'll catch a few and make an example of them as a warning. I may be old, but I'm not so decrepit that I'll sit back and let these bastards take advantage." While Tai Yu was making a public show of dealing with the minor gangs, Shen Zichuan's cold was gradually improving. Fei Sheng had been efficient in his record keeping. Not only had he documented all the prices of goods in Chazhou, he sent someone to Fanzhou to do the same. Shen Zichuan didn't spread the news that Cizhou was getting into the grain trade. Within the first few days of their residence in the city, he simply sent Kongling around Chazhou to buy up imported goods, as though they had made the trip merely to conduct a bit of trade. Whenever someone came by to inquire about the purpose of their visit, Kongling's reply was equivocating. After a few days of his dull responses, far fewer people came to pry. Kongling followed Shen Zichuan to the shops in Chazhou owned by the Shi clan, which mainly dealt with rouge, medicinal herbs, and foreign goods smuggled from abroad. Starving refugees swarm outside the gates, while the city remains peaceful and prosperous. In good times and troubled ones, the ones who suffer will always be the common people. Kongling picked up a handful of medicinal herbs, took a sniff, and said, approvingly, "This is quality stuff." Shi Hongshuan had a businessman's instincts. Shen Zichuan glanced around the shop. Most people wouldn't dare open a shop like this here for fear of robbery or bankruptcy. Within the last few years, the people of Zhongbo could scarcely afford a bowl of rice porridge. Who would have thought the powerful men in this city would spend more extravagantly than the merchants of Jueshi? A shop like this is just what they need. Henry. Yeah. I just love how Kongling is like the troubled people, the troubled times, the people are starving, and then he's like, good herbs. Money makes the mare go, Kongling lamented. In speaking of Shi Hongshuan's businesses, Shen Zichuan was divulging information about his own finances. Kongling understood that this was a mark of Shen Zichuan's trust, acknowledgement for his support in Cizhou. Kongling felt his chest tighten. He had been far too impulsive that day. Modesty was a virtue. Flaunting his intelligence before a brilliant master had not been a wise move. Kongling carefully did not reply, so Shen Zichuan dropped the subject. He looked through the account books for a while and asked the shopkeepers for news from Jueshi. When the shopkeepers presented him with some trinkets as a tribute of respect, Shen Zichuan rejected items like jadeware, accepting only a fan that caught his eye. He had gotten accustomed to the fan Xiao Chuya had gifted him before it was stained, and this new one didn't feel quite right in his hand. For now, he would make do, but he was counting on Xiao Chuya to not forget his promise when he returned. As the rain finally ceased in Chazhou, it had just begun to fall in Libei. The weather in Zhongbo was still warm at the tail end of summer, but in Libei, the air was starting to cool. The winds picked up in the 7th month, and once the rainy season ended, the days would get colder. Xiao Chuya had been in a foul mood since receiving Xiao Fengshu's letter. He had remained at 3rd Sand Camp, but had expanded the range of his patrols to overlap with the ones from Border Camp, keeping watch over both camps and guarding all fronts. Wu Ziyu had initially planned to go north 3 days hence to deliver the battle steeds, but had delayed his departure indefinitely. He couldn't set out on his own. He had to follow Xiao Chuya's orders. Xiao Fengshu's letter had officially made Xiao Chuya the commanding general overseeing equipment and supplies. Xiao Chuya had no say in where he went, and had to heed the orders of the other generals who required resupply all over Libei. Xiao Chuya stepped down from the fortress walls and walked to his tent through the rain. The sky was beginning to darken, and the mess cook was scraping a pot as he hollered out the call for mealtime. The Libei armored cavalry and the Imperial Army 8 apart, squatting with their backs to each other, as if separated by an invisible wall. In the case of the Libe armored cavalry, they tasted one defeat after another and couldn't get over the humiliation of their repeated losses. Meanwhile, the Imperial Army had never been a model of decorum. Everyone was used to cracking jokes and horsing around. They had few rules to follow once they stripped off their armor, and were a playful bunch who loved their fun, something the Libe armored cavalry looked down upon. Xiao Jie accepted a handkerchief from Chen Yang and wiped sweat from his face. The flaps of his tent were wide open, and the hanging screens were raised to try to catch a breeze. Before Xiao Jie could take a seat, Gu Jin stepped inside with a bundle in his arms. "Master, a letter from Gongzi." He took it and waved a hand, gesturing for them to leave. Xiao Jie brewed himself tea and drank a cup as he unwrapped the bundle, revealing a neatly folded stack of clothes and a bulging oilskin bag. He paid no attention to the clothing. He opened the bag. Inside were only 2 items: a handful of orange jasmine, its flowers withered and flattened by the journey, and a letter, slightly damp after being wrapped for so long. When Xiao Jie picked it up, he could still smell the scent of the jasmine on it. He finished the tea in one gulp, then unfolded the paper. The letter was short. Xiao Jie had finished reading it by the time he swallowed his tea. He turned his head toward the entrance of the tent, where Chen Yang and Gu Jin still stood, and said calmly, "Lower the hanging screens. I'm cold." Gu Jin wanted to ask, "Weren't you sweating just a moment ago?" But Chen Yang had already removed the hooks and let the screens down. The moment he was shielded from view, Xiao Jie read the letter again, and then again. Finally, he rubbed at his ear, picked up the stack of clothing, and collapsed heavily onto his cot. He held up the letter, letting his eyes linger on each word. "It's been too many days since we parted. I know you must miss me, so I've sent a small token to offer you comfort. Touch it as if you touched me." Excuse me, I'm gonna cry now. Xiao Jie stared at that line of text and read it once more. "Touch it as if you touched me." His throat felt dry, but laughter bubbled up inexplicably, and his gaze grew fierce. Scrawled at the very bottom, in a light and hasty hand, were the words, "A cold pillow makes for difficult nights. When will you return to our bed? A good night's sleep is only possible with me in your arms." Xiao Jie let the letter fall from his fingers and gazed up at the ceiling. A moment later, he rolled over and buried his face in the pillow. It was as if Shen Zichuan was lying beside him, nibbling at his ear and whispering languidly, "A good night's sleep is only possible with me in your arms." That's the end of the chapter. Let me see something. Okay, this is a short chapter. There is time. So, let me see. I think this is the last chapter of the day on page 293, chapter 138, which is called Strategist. I'm not going to get over that letter. I'm gonna be thinking about that. Shen Zichuan woke with the sun. After breakfast, he took the carriage back to the cosmetics shop with Kong Ling. Business continued as usual in the front hall, while in the back courtyard, Chao Tianya and Fei Sheng stood guard, and the embroidered uniform guard kept careful watch both inside and outside the premises. Half an hour later, Luo Mu's sedan arrived. He was dressed casually in a brick-red robe with wide sleeves and a slanted collar. The shopkeeper at the front desk was a sharp man. Noting that the servants behind Luo Mu were unfamiliar, he raised his voice. "It's already hot out. We can't let our guests stand outside in the sun. Men, show these fellows inside for some tea." The servants exchanged a glance. Luomu couldn't run from them here. They followed the shop assistant into another room and took a seat. Still, they insisted on raising the curtains to keep an eye on the entrance. The shopkeeper walked beside Luomu and offered a handkerchief. Luomu wiped his hands as usual and strolled around the shop, looking at the goods on the shelves. The shopkeeper smiled. "The last time Your Excellency came by, we didn't have everything in stock. We prepared in advance this time. Some new jade pieces and trinkets have just arrived from the east as well. They're all in the back. This way, please." Luomu cast a hesitant glance at his servants. "It's just across the courtyard. It won't take up too much of Your Excellency's time," the shopkeeper urged. "These are rare goods. You'll be much more comfortable taking your time browsing in the back." Luomu reluctantly nodded and followed the shopkeeper to the courtyard at the back of the shop. Chao Tianya drew the curtain aside for Luomu, who murmured his thanks and lowered his head to enter. He first bowed to Shen Zichuan, then looked toward Kong Ling. Only upon seeing that both their expressions were relaxed did he take his seat. Noting that Luomu was dressed as a diligent scholar today, Shen Zichuan presumed he had chosen his clothes and shoes for this errand with care. Although he sat ramrod straight, he couldn't keep from glancing subconsciously at Kong Ling from time to time as they spoke, and the moment Kong Ling opened his mouth, Luomu's eyes fixed attentively upon him. "Tai Yu has focused his attention on squashing the smaller gangs in the last few days," Luomu explained. "But he knows where to draw the line. He understands the principle of interdependence. These bandits share a common lot. If one falls, the others will follow. He fears he will end up isolated if he goes too far. At the same time as he's striking at the smaller gangs he thinks are opposing him, he's trying to win over the remaining up-and-comers by offering them cheap grain." Remembering that Shen Zichuan was there, Luomu exercised restraint and glanced away from Kong Ling. "He plans to give those gangs who haven't stirred up trouble the opportunity to sell grain at a discount and make a quick return." "What is he offering them?" Kong Ling asked. "1 tael of silver for 5 dough of rice," Luomu answered. Kong Ling smiled. "That's hardly a low price. His so-called discount merely means he makes a tiny bit less profit than others out there. Tai Yu used to be generous about helping the needy, considering himself above money and worldly possessions. He's gotten miserly in his old age. At this price, the grain could hardly be called cheap. Indeed, it was still exorbitantly expensive. Chajo's going rate for rice was 1 tael of silver for 2 dough of rice, while in Chudu, 1 tael of silver purchased 20 times as much. Tai Yu was making money hand over fist, while driving the common folk to starvation. Even to win over his adversaries, he had only lowered the price this tiny bit. The man was genuinely obsessed with wealth. He couldn't bear to undercut his own profits. Shen Zichuan skimmed the foam in his tea. Tai Yu is in a fix, too. He can't back down. Everyone inside and outside the city is complaining about the high price of grain. If he lowers the price drastically for the sake of some minor bandits, the common folk will hate him even more than they do now. He doesn't dare. It's not just Chajo. Public wrath is growing, even in Fanzhou. Luomu was well acquainted with Tai Yu's business dealings. At the beginning of this year, the Yan clan severed their connection with Lei Chongming, and Yan Heru stopped sponsoring the bandits from Mount Luo, though no one knows why. This is one of the reasons Lei Chongming set his sights on Suzhou and its granary. They couldn't afford to buy Tai Yu's grains. Let Tai Yu sell for a few days. Shen Zichuan turned over his folding fan and tapped it lightly against the table. It doesn't matter if it's 1 tael for 2 dough or 1 tael for 5 dough. Neither the common folk nor the minor bandits can afford it. Tai Yu is gritting his teeth to show such kindness, because he's hoping these bandits will knuckle under. But he's too arrogant by far. It's bound to backfire. It's not just the common folk, Kongling lamented. Even government officials can't afford to buy grain at these prices on the monthly salary issued by the imperial court. On our way here, we saw people selling themselves like cattle outside Chazhou. Parents are selling all their children just for a chance at survival. People aren't worth much nowadays. Even if they sell the children, no one's paying more than a handful of coppers. Luomu had long heard of this practice. Look at the situation we're in. Who in Zhongbo will pay just to have another mouth to feed? Only the brothels in Fanzhou are willing to take them. And even there, a child from a good family sold into the bottom class wouldn't even be worth a dough of rice. Shen Zichuan was unfamiliar with the situation in Fanzhou. If Fanzhou can't even feed its own people, where is it getting money to operate brothels? They're run by bandits, too. These specifically deal in the flesh trade, and work with the bandits from Mount Law and Dongzhou, Luomu answered. The prostitutes are dirt cheap, and whatever tiny bit they make is swallowed by the madams. But they have to feed the people they buy, right? Kongling asked, perplexed. Do they buy grain from Tai Yu, too? Luomu shook his head. Humans are worth less than dogs in Fanzhou. They're fed swill and weeds. If a few starve to death, the bandits can buy more. The cost is negligible. They won't suffer a loss either way. Kongling sat in a daze, a look of anguish coming over his face. To think Zhongbo has been reduced to this. If the imperial court had taken action earlier, how could this situation have deteriorated so utterly? I said many years back that Hua Siqian and... Shen Wei's name lodged in his throat. Knowing Kongling, Luomu feared he would say something to upset Shen Zichuan. He quickly changed the subject. In the vice commander's opinion, what should we do next? In lieu of answering, Shen Zichuan said, if Shen Wei hadn't fled before the enemy, Zhongbo wouldn't have suffered such a devastating loss. I hold Mr. Chongfeng in the highest esteem for his concern for the common people. There's no need to shy away from this subject. Shen Zichuan spoke with such sincerity that Luomu was embarrassed instead. Kongling felt his heart sink. Recently, he had been doing his best to avoid Shen Zichuan despite their proximity on this mission. Kongling was a clever man. He was willing to work for Zhou Gui because he understood Zhou Gui's character, but he still felt wary around Shen Zichuan. Following Shen Zichuan, he thought, was ultimately a dangerous move. Masters who were difficult to read were the hardest to serve. The calmer the vice commander appeared on the surface, the more cautiously Kongling had to tread, lest one misstep land him in a bottomless abyss. Kongling didn't mind working with Shen Zichuan, but was unwilling to devote himself to him the way he had Zhou Gui. Shen Zichuan had been dropping hints the entire trip, yet Kongling had feigned ignorance at every turn. Now, seeing that Shen Zichuan was not only unoffended, but had even excused his awkward slip of the tongue, he was filled with increasing trepidation. Noticing the shift in Kongling's expression, Shen Zichuan gently turned over his fan and paused for a moment before speaking. Keep the fact that Suzhou is here to sell grain quiet for a few more days. Wait until the bandits are fed up with Tai Yu pushing them around, and decide to prioritize their own interests. Only then will we release the news. At that point, don't bring our grain wagons into the city. We'll set up porridge tents right outside of the walls and tell the refugees Suzhou is here to sell grain at a fair price. What if they have no money? Luomu probed tentatively. Shen Zichuan smiled. Are these people not Chazhou's future garrison troops and the cultivators of your farmlands? The common people may be poor, but your excellency has amassed quite a sum yourself with Cai Yu's help. What's more, once Cai Yu is out of the picture, A large part of his assets will fall into your excellency's hands. Use that silver to do business with Suzhou in exchange for winning the hearts of the people, and many of your excellency's future problems will be solved. That said, I must remind you that Suzhou is here to do business, not to tighten its own belt to offer charity to others. Beads of sweat sprang up on Luomu's forehead. He dabbed his brow with the handkerchief and nodded. But of course. Shen Zichuan returned to his manor in Chazhou without Kongling. Chao Tianya sat in the driver's seat with his hands clasped behind his head, tilting the brim of his bamboo hat forward. From the other side of the curtain, he asked, Master, you don't want him any more? Wilting in the heat, Shen Zichuan closed his eyes to rest within the stuffy interior of the carriage. He listened to the peddlers hawking their wares along the street for a moment before answering. I've tried both carrot and stick, but he's determined to turn me down. Speaking around the fresh stalk of grass sticking out of his mouth, Chao Tianya said, That's to be expected. He's hidden his abilities in front of you on more than one occasion because he's afraid of being coerced. After completing his education, he didn't follow in Zhogui and Luomu's footsteps and join the ranks of the civil officials. He wants to be a civilian. Men like him are natural-born strategists. His point of pride is his ability to choose his own path. Shen Zichuan opened his eyes a crack. It's not as if he's my only option. It wasn't that he wished to force Kongling into serving him, but the fact was, Shen Zichuan genuinely lacked manpower. At first, he had thought Kongling and Zhogui were the best arrangement. Put together, the pair of them could ensure the peace and stability of Suzhou at the very least, and perhaps a whole region. But now, Shen Zichuan needed someone at his side who could advise and plan. He no longer lacked a pair of eyes or a pair of hands, but a strategist who could assist him in devising long-term tactics. Kongling had a reputation in Zhongbo as a man of considerable talent and had been fellow students with both Zhogui and Luomu. Based on these relationships alone, he could assist Shen Zichuan with many issues in both prefectures. For instance, he had been able to see Luomu directly upon arriving in Chazhou by simply delivering a visitation card. He also possessed the social connections he had built up among the Dunzhou garrison troops from his time as Tantai Long's advisor. As long as these connections remained alive, they could be of use in the future. Shen Zichuan hadn't initially thought highly of Kongling. When Lei Jingzhe had tried to hoodwink him, Kongling had been too easily deceived. Kongling's shout outside Suzhou's city walls was what made Shen Zichuan take note of him again. But it was not until Kongling had so swiftly agreed to Shen Zichuan's proposal before they set off for Chazhou that Shen Zichuan had fully set his mind on taking Kongling into his employ. However, it seemed Kongling had no intention of changing masters. For one thing, Shen Zichuan was too young. Not only was he burdened with a difficult past, growing up under stigma and hardship, he had also studied under Qi Huilian. Qi Huilian had seen many ups and downs in Chudu, and had served as the head of the Eastern Palace for many years. What kind of student would such a teacher produce? Qi Huilian was meant to raise an emperor, a point Kongling didn't dare dwell upon. Most importantly, Kongling feared Shen Zichuan. He couldn't bring himself to trust him. In the eyes of Kongling, Shen Zichuan knew he was a cold-hearted man who would cast aside personal relationships in a heartbeat. Had Zhogui been the negotiator here today, he would never have spoken such pointed words to Luomu. Vexed, Shen Zichuan raised his head to watch the curtain of the carriage sway amid the jolts and bumps of the road. Sunlight flickered through the gaps, spilling onto his knees and melting into the white of his robe. Since the day of Qi Huilian's death, Shen Zichuan had worn only white in mourning. He had never asked Chao Tianya what Han Chung did with his teacher's body after he left Chudu. His anguished wails that night were known only to Xiao Chuye. But the names of Xue Xiuzhuo, Han Chung, and the Empress Dowager were seared into Shen Zichuan's heart, along with his last sight of the city walls of Chudu, stained red in the pouring rain. He had to stand firm. He needed a strategist. A voice inside him murmured, a strategist who can stand up to Xue Xiuzhuo as his equal. Ooh, ooh, ooh. Well, that is the end of the chapter. That's where we're stopping. You know, and I saw your comment from earlier, Henry, when you said, well, that's disturbing. And I agree. We had kind of a surprising amount of very unpleasant happenings discussed today. But also a very sweet moment with the letter. And I was just gonna say, before I go, I love the way that chapter letter reading is both like about the letter from Shen Zichuan and about the letters that were, I assume, like planted and then Cai Yu found out about them. I just love little things like that. So when we come back on Monday, we will be on page 301 for chapter 139, which is called The Price of Grain. We're learning so much about grain, the sale of grain, the profiting on overpriced grain, all that fun stuff. I was going to say, whoa, next week is the last week of this volume. And that means, wait, is it? Yeah, it is. Yeah, only 2 more streams of this volume, which means next week is, next week we say goodbye to this book, this series, for a while. We say goodbye to Ballad of Sword and Wine for, like, 4 volumes of Case File, and then we will come back to it. So, I can't believe that's already happening next week, but, yeah. So I'm gonna go. Thank y'all for coming. I will see you again on Monday. Bye.